two YouTube stars, Logan Paul and Psy, and released a whole series of drinks called Prime.
It's banned, right? So the FDA approves the overdose reversing drug Narcan for over-the-counter sales.
This is something that triggers all of those societal phobias around drug addicts and addiction and giving them easy access and gateway drugs. Coffee is just borrowing some energy. It's not creating new energy from scratch. If you keep drinking coffee, you will feel alert for an amount of time, and then by 2 p.m. you're rubbing it into your gums. The views expressed in this podcast are our own opinions and thoughts. They do not reflect the views of our employers. So I do all the editing for the podcast. We don't have some fancy editors that we outsource this to. And we collectively, between the two of us, have a common vocal tick. Can you guess what that is?
Oh, I don't know.
You don't know?
I know I say a lot, but I think
that's universal. I try and remove the ums. We both like to say, that's right.
Oh, I was going to say that.
Yeah, we both agree with each other a little too much. We think each other are full of good ideas, maybe when we don't have such good ideas.
If only. If no one else listens, at least we validate each other.
That is our vocal tick. I only noticed it recently. It feels very natural to tell your co-host that they're right. It just feels right.
Wrong.
Wrong.
You're wrong.
That's wrong, actually. It just contradicts each other.
Wrong.
It would be more exciting if we disagree with each other all the time. Welcome to Crossover Connections with Jack Wayne. This is episode 6 of our running podcast, talking about science, technology, and education in an effort to understand the broader field, the broader sphere of scientific and technology headlines. We are both operating and working within an area of science and innovation. I work within microbiology, and I also teach as a professor at an Australian university. Amanda?
Yeah, I work as a manager of clinical research.
And between the two of us, we have a certain amount of expertise and a certain amount of overlap in our understanding. But the more we read, the more we realize the vast breadth of all the knowledge out there, especially in science and especially in biology, I think. No biologist is exactly the same as another biologist, I think.
True. It's a huge field.
We divide our own little fiefdoms up into sub-disciplines and sub-sub-disciplines, and we're all trying to grapple with it. So this is our effort to make sense of the headlines, and hopefully our journey in making sense of the headlines is of interest to you, someone who may be further along their journey or further back in the journey. And this is our new recurring segment in the podcast where we address previous segments on previous episodes of the podcast. This is called The Connect. The first headline that relates to a topic we talked about previously.
California's plan for cheaper insulin collides with big pharma's price cuts.
Back in episode 4, I believe, we talked about the idea of insulin having a dramatic price cut by Eli Lilly at that time. I think the other makers of insulin might have followed suit. And we weren't sure why exactly that was happening. It was quite a dramatic price cut, and it was announced as a hallelujah.
That's true, because there was a huge price discrepancy between what people are paying across different countries for essentially the same drug.
And I wouldn't say Eli Lilly was being lauded and celebrated, but certainly that was a feel-good headline. Everyone who has type 2 diabetes or diabetes would need some version of insulin. Eli Lilly is one of the 3 big makers of it, so they're kind of their prices. That's good for everyone. Now, this headline is actually not a surprise to me at all, in that this price cut was in response to a move that maybe we are finding out now, but potentially they had more behind the scenes.
Another competitor coming into the market, wasn't it?
The state of California and USA has amazing purchasing power, it seems. I think in of itself, it can be considered a country in terms of its GDP. They had agreed on a $50 million government contract to a non-for-profit called Civica to make an insulin, not an alternative, but essentially a non-branded version of insulin that's not through one of the 3 big makers, Eli Lilly, Sanofi, and Novo Nordisk, I believe, the 3 brand name insulins. And for those of you who do take insulins, it's really important to take the same kind of insulin again and again, because even just a slight miscalculation and how much you prescribe for the day could really throw off all the things that you're eating and you're living. The government has endorsed a competitor against these drug companies. So when that happens, the reaction in a competitive landscape is to say, what can we do to short circuit that or circumvent this?
And it's to bring the price down, isn't it?
So they are just as cheap, if not cheaper, than this alternative. Not to mention, the alternative still needs federal approval.
The goal of offering cheaper medicine than brand name companies may be much harder to achieve now that those major drug makers have decided to significantly drop sticker prices on some products.
And also, any new drug that's made is not just going to be rubber stamped and rolled out. It needs to go through some kind of approval, and they estimate that to be about 2 years.
That's right.
So this non-for-profit, good intentions and all, is 2 years behind the 8 ball with a product that might be outcompeted price-wise before it even gets rolled out.
Very true.
So it's a ruthless business. The cherry on top to this is the extra additional revelation that insulin apparently wasn't a biggest moneymaker for these drug companies anyway, that they've got alternative products, newer drugs for diabetes and obesity that make even more of the money for these companies. So they've been in this game, they're going to protect their turf, they're going to really behead the game. This just shows how quickly moving this landscape is. And again, if you're someone who has their insulin from a specific provider, and if that pricing changes, your quality of life changes dramatically, this is a tough spot to be in.
It's true, you can feel very much at the mercy of it all, can't you? I mean, when the prices are fluctuating all over the place, you just want some consistency in what's going on, wouldn't you?
So we're going to keep an eye on it.
Watch this space.
Maybe Civica's alternative will come onto the market much quicker. And
it's always a good thing to have more competition in the market.
Definitely, but it's not
easy. Prices competitive for everyone.
But it's not easy. Even with $50 million from the government, you could come to market with a failed product in terms of its pitch.
Well, that's true. It needs a lot of approvals to come through still.
And the next article is now a recurring sub-segment on the Connect, which we've titled
Bat Watch.
Reclamation Project for the Reputation of Our Noble Bats.
For non-repeat listeners, we may have unintentionally vilified these innocent creatures. So this is about rectifying their reputation.
And they carry a whole bunch of different viruses, and those viruses don't make them sick. They've got an amazing immune system.
They're super fit from flying all the time.
And they do fly all the time and everywhere in an increasingly urbanized environment, and they affect everyone and everything.
We're just jealous.
We give them a bad name, but microbats. What's the story here?
Microbats affected by recent cold snap could take refuge in people's homes.
For those of you watching in the online video version through YouTube, you will see a nice, as cute and cuddly, I guess, as a bat look picture. It's like a baby bat.
If I found one of these, I probably would have thought it was a baby bat or some kind of mutant mouse.
Some kind of mutant mouse. Got a mighty mouse, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think the thing here is it's been found in places that people don't typically expect to find bats. Okay. Increasing volatility in weather patterns, certainly in this part of Australia and New South Wales, is making it so that their ecosystem and their habitats are even more disrupted than usual.
Right.
Of course, with urbanization and sort of like housing renovations, all that kind of stuff.
It makes sense, but I didn't even know microbats were a thing. So again, I know nothing.
Now we know. Maybe this is the softer, cuddlier, fuzzier version of bats.
That's right.
There's some bat PR team thinking of rolling this out.
What can we talk about next? Microbats.
Microbats. Maybe they listen to this podcast.
The cuter, fluffier version of bats.
Maybe they've really taken offense to our small podcast offending the honor of these noble creatures.
For those very few listeners, rescuers have seen increased call-outs to microbats in Broken Hill on the back of weather fluctuations. Tens of thousands of the bats roost through buildings and trees in the far west New South Wales city. At least 6 different species of microbat have been recorded by rescuers.
Now, I am not a copy editor for any news organization, very thankfully. That's a very, very detail-oriented job I'm not cut out for. But I would say this article is sending mixed messages. Because on one hand, it's trying to paint this cute, cuddly version of bats, microbats. They're cute.
Here's a little microbat.
So vulnerable.
Roosting in your jacket.
You can
just
find
wants a warm space to live.
You can find your jacket on these screen doors. Please protect them. But then what does the subheading say? It says microbats can carry contagion. Now, you could say that in a way that's not quite so aggressive.
You don't have to use the word contagion.
So let's have a go. How would you rewrite this subheading? Instead of saying microbats can carry contagion, as part of our bat reclamation project, you have to make them seem a little less dangerous.
I was going to say microbats may carry disease.
May
but
carry
I don't
disease.
know that's much better.
I think that's worse. Microbats may be infectious. That's not that great either, is it? Infectious versus contagion. Contagion just sounds bad. I'm sorry. Contagion sounds like it's kind of nuclear.
That's right.
Nuclear bomb of
something that's just going to spread throughout the whole population if you touch a bat. And we can't say microbats are dirty bats.
Oh yeah, that's filthy animals. Warning: microbats are particularly filthy.
Can't say that. No,
around this time of the year.
We can't say that.
Yeah,
and I don't know. Maybe the copy editor did a great job.
Maybe
here.
they did a great job. Maybe we're critiquing again from a place of ignorance and not realizing just how hard it is
microbats
to reclaim it.
Well, the cuter version of your larger, super fit cousins.
To juxtapose the negativity implied by can carry contagion, cute little image of it in a little jacket.
In a jacket.
Little jacket, right? Or maybe a cartoon schematic of it to help communicate it. But I think people have the right idea in mind. These people who are very caring towards the animal are called the service. Or I'll protect it myself, but not knowing that these are actually very, very fit things that may carry viruses or may carry contagion, and then you'll get infected.
Not ideal to touch a bat.
Please don't touch bats.
Yep. So I guess the advice is to call a wildlife carer.
Yes.
If you encounter a microbat.
And the next headline in the Connect is all around the tech industry and the tech layoffs that are happening. Meta, parent company, Amazon,
all of these layoffs.
maybe Apple and Disney and all these people with tech divisions, they're firing lots and lots of people. And these are usually people with a lot of education, a lot of skills. Many of these are engineers who traditionally are immune to these kind of layoffs because they are the most skilled laborers within their relative organizations that are a little bit harder to replace. How any person survives within this landscape of finding jobs and how we bolster our employability is really up in the air. Now, what's interesting about this article is that the thesis here is very much Australian centric.
Right.
And it's saying if you work in tech or you would like to work in tech, the grass is not always greener. The Silicon Valley greener pastures of constant innovation, record profits doesn't seem to be driving innovation at the same pace as it once was.
Yeah, that it may have ended.
Remote work becoming more feasible, international collaboration becoming more feasible. You might not need to go to the US to relocate and move your whole family just to find this job in a startup that may crumble within 6 to 12 months. Interesting parallel to our sector of research, isn't it? So in your experience, what has been the perception of people who choose to stay in one country for their whole careers doing research versus being a global adventurer in terms of science and innovation?
I think quite unfairly so in a lot of aspects. It's not seen favourably if you choose to stay in Australia after you finished your PhD. It's quite common for someone to travel overseas, the US, UK, Europe, do a postdoc, and it's viewed very favourably, especially upon return to Australia. And often you have these very well-funded, quite powerful laboratories in these countries, and it's seen very positively for you to work for them. And then when you come back, that's making you more competitive for funding and fellowships.
That's the traditional model.
The traditional model.
I think that's still very much in place because those research powerhouses are very much research factories in a way. You know, they've got all the facilities, all the equipment.
It's true.
They've got the legendary PIs that have just got 20 years worth of track record, and if you go work for them, their name alone carries so much weight.
Famous in our field, essentially. If you work for famous, important principal investigators in our field.
Yeah, so you go work for...
who publish high impact.
You go work for someone who's won a Nobel Prize in your field, for instance, and then you just take a little piece of it away. That experience is very hard to reconcile. If you're a young researcher or you've got a young family, that's a really difficult transitional period. For as many success stories as we've heard, there are just as many flameouts. As with anything that's competitive. So you can make this dramatic move and lose all the advantage of your connections within your own country to try and chase this thing, much like the Silicon Valley pursuit of this bubble. So nowadays, I know quite a few researchers who have international impact without necessarily moving to a new country, and they gain the benefit of those local domestic networks. Maybe instead of moving to another country, you can move interstate. I think the key here is independence. How can you prove that you are the one driving the initiative? If you go overseas, but you're still not driving it, you're at the mercy of someone else's intellectual input, then that's still not going to be perceived as you being the person that is the key instigator and investigator behind all of it. And behind this is a really useful lesson for employability in that your perceived value as an employee is not actually about what you've done. If you can go and prove your market value somewhere else in an external setting, and when you bring that value back, you must be amazing. Other people think you're great. It's not just us that think you're good, but you must be doing really well. You can convince other people that you're really great. The only way to keep up with that rat race is to try and learn new skills and never be content with the portfolio of roles and the types of tasks that you're doing. And that can be very challenging and intimidating here if you're a young graduate. And the key here is that you have to keep trying to learn new things to never be very easily defined as a known quantity, whether it be going to Silicon Valley or joining a startup or going to a different research laboratory halfway around the world. If you do that, but you're not adding more to your mystique as an individual employee, then they'll be able to pin you down and say, well, you fit in this little box.
Here's a bunch of other people who do as well.
I can rank you very easily, so then you're worth this much or you're not competitive in another sphere.
Versatility and adaptability is really key here. I would like to think that undertaking a PhD enables a lot of these personalities to be trained really to learn new skills and to not be intimidated by taking on something new. But oftentimes it goes the other way too, and people very much reside within their niche and don't branch out enough.
I think that it is a very selective training process that is not suited for everyone. But for those that can go through it, you will not learn any more in your whole life, I would argue, than during your PhD, because you will have to magically summon knowledge from nothing. That's kind of it, right? It's a magic trick.
It's really about answering a question that's not known. isn't it?
Complexities in that force you to find skills and develop skills you didn't know you needed, and
That's right.
ask the questions that you had no idea you even needed to know the answers to.
You have to be adaptable, I think. Can't do this. How else could I go about it? What skills could I learn? Who could I contact to give advice on this?
And for those of you who are just about to finish a PhD or very close to finishing a PhD or feel like you should be very close to finishing a PhD, I think that's the trap a lot of us fall into, in that we think we're training for one very specific job in the PhD, and that's to become an academic. But as soon as you step outside of the academic arena, you'll very quickly realize people in all sorts of sectors don't think about problems the way that scientists, academically minded researchers think about it. And this problem-solving mindset is incredibly valuable out there in the marketplace. And if you go to a different sector, all of a sudden your scientific training becomes a really rare unicorn type skill set that's very mysterious.
I don't look at a problem and think it just can't be done most of the time. And I think that's a training skill set that's come from the PhD. It's more, how would we go about this? What could we do? What could we do instead? How else might we answer the question? A lot of people with PhDs don't realize the skill set that they have, and they feel very much stuck within their niche, don't they? And they don't realize their versatility.
And I'll reiterate this. Employability is not actually about what you've done. That's kind of your CV, but your CV does not make you employable. Employability is how you articulate and explain what you've done in the past and how that translates into the next thing that you're doing. Fundamentally a communication skill rather than just what you've done previously. Make your CV a living and breathing document and articulate it to the next potential employer. That is the roundup of all the articles we talked about previously, and then we're going to move on to the actual new articles that have made the headlines this week in science, tech, and productivity or careers.
South Australia records first measles case in 3 years, with more expected as global case numbers grow.
Measles is, of course, an infectious disease that most people thought was a thing of the past, given that measles vaccinations pretty much reached saturation point and measles cases were non-existent for very, very many years. But now this is a South Australian example.
A 3-year-old boy has tested positive to measles in South Australia. More measles cases are expected after global immunisation levels dropped during the COVID-19 pandemic. People born between 1966 and the mid-1980s should check they are fully vaccinated against measles.
That's us, isn't it? We're born in the mid-1980s. We should probably double check.
Double check that we're born then, or double check that we're vaccinated?
No. My mind is quite foggy, but it's not that muddled. I do know the year that I was born. So mid-1980s, we should probably check our measles vaccinations are up to scratch, or we don't need a booster shot. This was a thing of the past. I mean, it's the MMR vaccine, right?
Yes,
Measles,
that's
mumps,
right.
rubella, which is routine as part of infant vaccination schedules. Vaccination rates across the board, across the globe have dropped. I don't want to speculate all the reasons it's happened. It's multifactorial, to say the least. It is a combination of poor communication, poor education, misinformation, online hysteria, all these things. It's not a great situation to be in. Here's my thesis on this. It's only reached this level of hysteria because of the delivery mechanism of vaccines. Because people are willing to pop all sorts of things into their mouths, and the amount of recreational drug use, if it's something you smoke or something you eat, people are willing to
Put it on your face.
People are willing to do anything, but it's just the jabby jab, right? They're just scared of the jabby jab. And that has started all of this hysteria.
Now you've given it a cutesy name. I don't feel so fearful anymore. The doctor goes, time for your measles jabby jab. But actually, you're a grown adult.
I will maybe find it a bit condescending, but then I would appreciate their attempt to make me feel at ease.
To communicate,
Yeah, I could definitely vaccination every year. And the nurses do always kind of look at me and say, are you good with needles? Are you going to be okay? They do that to you, or is it just I look like a wimp? Sometimes. That's just good.
Not all the time. I had one who was amazing a couple of years ago. I actually didn't feel anything. And you think, whatever. Like, what do you mean? But no, I actually didn't feel anything. And I was concerned that maybe she hadn't injected me or something, until my arm started feeling a little bit sore afterwards.
Okay.
And when I went and compared my experience with my colleagues, they said, that injector was amazing. What's going on? Okay. The nurses really do a lot of the grunt work, don't they? And so they're the main injectors.
You talk to any immunologist, they'll say back when people had iron lungs, no one complained about vaccines. And back when people had polio, no one complained about vaccines. It was just so visible on the street when people weren't vaccinated. But these vaccines have protected us for so many years that people are oblivious to the protective benefits they have. And measles is one of these things that has been forgotten because it was and remains highly, highly transmissible. To be honest here, I'll be frank, I'm a bit tired of talking about COVID. I talk about it all the time in my work, and people always ask me about COVID as a microbiologist. But it is an easy entrance into people's consciousness, having something to compare it against. Measles versus COVID, which is more infectious. There's one measure that you would have seen, which is the measure of R0 naught. It is the basic reproduction number. Equates to the number of people
that one person will infect.
So if you have one person infected with that pathogen, how many more people will they infect? This is subject to lots of variability. If you're in a more crowded place versus in a not crowded place, if you're in a population that's very highly vaccinated versus not, the R naught, the basic reproduction number, will change. The article here, which is from the conversation, original ancestral SARS-CoV-2 had an R naught of about 3. So one person on average would infect about 3 people, give or take. With the newer strains of COVID being closer to 8 to 10, one person will infect 10 people. So that's the most transmissible strains of COVID or variants of COVID that exist. Measles has an R naught of 12 to 18, up to twice as more transmissible as the most transmissible forms of COVID. Very, very dangerous, especially if it affects infants. This brings me back to my thesis that this is a very preventable thing.
Yes,
Many of the vaccines are nowhere near as contentious as the COVID vaccine has been, rightly or wrongly. And it is to do with the fear of the jabby jab. To further cement my thesis, I will present as my argument 2 recent headlines on drugs that are just as controversial, if not more controversial.
FDA approves new nasal spray to treat migraine headaches in adults, Pfizer says.
So this is to treat migraines, which is not a universal affliction, I would say, but it's certainly something people know exists as a condition.
I think they say it's about 10% of the general population.
So if you don't have migraines,
females.
if you don't have migraines, you will know someone with migraines. And this medication, it is a drug that is marketed as Zavspret. That's a lot of Russian, actually. Zavspret. How does this drug work?
It blocks the calcitonin gene-related peptide, or CGRP. So my understanding is that it blocks it from binding to its receptor.
And how cells receive information from their external surroundings is they have receptors. They stick out from the cell surface. They have a little pocket that should bind something. Receptors with the clearest single function will usually bind to one very specific type of molecule.
And then a certain transmission comes through the cell and some kind of cellular response occurs.
So there's a receptor on the cell surface, it binds to something specifically, gets that signal, and then that's a sign, hey, cell, do something.
In response to this calcitonin gene-related peptide, or CGRP. CGRP, I think, has been known about for quite a while, and its implication in migraine. It's essentially been implicated in level of pain as well as how long a migraine attack lasts for. And there's actually a lot of new classes of drug which target this particular peptide in some way, either by blocking it itself, the CGRP, from binding to its receptor, or by blocking the receptor. And there's a number of injectable drugs that have been approved, I think fairly recently in Australia. Ones that come to mind are Emgality, Adjuvant, and I think there's an infusion Vyepti. But in this case, they're talking about a new mechanism of delivery.
A nasal spray.
That's right.
And I don't suffer migraines myself. Do you suffer from migraines?
I do get migraine attacks, yes.
And what do you do when you feel a migraine coming on, or when you can anticipate today might be a day where you might have one?
So I'm lucky that a class of drug called triptans are quite effective for me. If I'm able to take this medication at the onset of a migraine attack, it's quite effective in stopping it, relieving some of the pain associated with it. In my case as well, nausea can be a huge problem. You feel very sick, you may not be able to take oral medication. I think having a nasal spray, it's quite a fast and effective delivery mechanism is fantastic.
So that's great. The fact that this drug is available for you and for other people who suffer from migraines is a new option.
In the US.
Now, that's a drug that's doing some pretty serious stuff, but it's delivered via innocuous nasal spray.
That's right.
My second piece of evidence that the jabby jab is the main reason why people are really against vaccines, not so much the vaccine itself. And this drug is even more controversial. This is yet another nasal spray.
Right, okay.
And it's Narcan. And what is Narcan supposed to do?
So the FDA approves the overdose reversing drug Narcan for over-the-counter sales.
Overdose reversing drug has been approved, and you can buy it over the counter.
Okay, in the US.
In the US, it's been approved anyway. I don't know if it's ready for sale right at this moment, like the new iPhone. They announced it and it's ready to go. I don't know if it's quite that quick. This is something that triggers all of those societal phobias around drug addicts and addiction and giving them easy access and gateway drugs. Is this too permissible? Do they think I can just OD because I can take a nasal spray and recover from it? Again, I think it's arrived with that much controversy. I think it's very much viewed as great, and that could reflect the society's overall improved dialogue around addiction, around drug overdose and drug misuse. I doubt it. That's my personal thesis. I think if this was marketed as a needle that you can get to treat the overdose, I think this would have much more negative connotations. The needle exchange clinics and the methadone clinic, they still have a bit of stigma around them, don't they? The delivery mechanism matters just as much, if not more, than what's in the drug that you're taking. People are just a little bit more intimidated
by something that injects into their body.
This fear of needles. And I don't know where it comes in. I don't know when in your life you start getting scared of needles, but it is, I guess, quite intimidating, this sharp object. To draw the parallels between the last drug we talked about, the CGRP.
Yep, that's right.
They block the receptors for that peptide versus this particular drug, naloxone. What is its mechanism of action?
So a similar mechanism of action in that it's blocking a receptor. So in this case, an opioid receptor, and it's essentially getting in the way and stopping the drug from binding and having that downstream effect.
And the reason for this becoming a mass market product is that overdoses are becoming much more common. It's not just quote unquote recreational drug use, but it's people who have been to hospital and have had surgery and are addicted to drugs like painkillers, oxy, fentanyl, morphine. These are drugs that you would need in hospital to recover. Outside of that scheme, it's very, very expensive to maintain, and people still get addicted to them. And so overdosing from that is skyrocketing across the world, certainly in the United States. So having this as a nasal spray is actually going to be a life-saving thing. And along with this approval, you'll see a lot of documentation around effective ways of administering this nasal spray. I presume the migraine nasal spray can be more self-administered. I would predict that you can't self-administer that easily if it's in response to loading. Which brings me to crossover of the week and the final set of articles we'll talk about today. Probably at one point the central star of the platform that we're on, which is both YouTube and the podcasting platforms.
This is very topical right now.
Very topical. Two YouTube stars, and I guess stars in their own right outside of YouTube in this day and age, Logan Paul and Psy, put their marketing brands together and released a whole series of drinks called Prime.
Okay.
It has been available globally for a little while. The official drink of one of the big sporting leagues, I think UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, endorses them as the official drink of the sport. So it's available globally. It has come to our shores in Australia and triggered a whole bunch of kerfuffle.
Well, it's funny because I was quite oblivious to all of this. I'd see occasional posts from, say, Instagrammers I might follow, and they'd put a picture of it and say, "If you know, you know." I was like, I don't know. What are you talking about? And they bought it for their kids.
Yes.
Because their kids have been desperately trying to source this drink. It's banned, right? Well, there's one variant that's sold in the supermarkets.
In terms of what's hit our shores, it is some version of 2 or 3 out of these drinks. So there is Prime Hydration. So again, it's great branding, Prime Hydration. From what I can see, it's coconut water.
Coconut? Okay.
With some unique concoction of artificial sweeteners.
Hopefully not erythritol.
Hopefully not erythritol. We have talked about artificial sweeteners on the podcast previously. See our last episodes about it and that all the long-term health effects it would have. But it's a rehydration drink and there's also a thick version, which is a powdered version of that same drink. Powerade, Gatorade have the powdered form. So that seems okay. Like it depends on the taste, I guess, right? So it depends on the marketing, depends on the taste. The one that is of concern in Australia, Prime Energy, which probably has the best marketing, the best name of more Prime Energy. So what is in Prime Energy that causing us Aussies to have this huge overreaction?
So it is caffeine. A lot of caffeine.
A ton of caffeine. Well, how much is too much caffeine?
Apparently 200 meg of caffeine in 355 mils is double the Australian legal limit of caffeine per 100 mils.
100 mils.
It's over the limit in its pack size, right?
Pack size, so it's condensed.
You could have a bunch of other energy drinks and reach the same amount of caffeine. That can't be regulated.
You could drink like 4 coffees in a row.
Yeah, that's right.
Eat a number of coffee beans and get it, but it's just within a drink.
But no, I've had those chocolate coated coffee beans. They're pretty good, actually.
They're pretty good. They're pretty good.
Nice.
The Australian legal limit apparently seems to be lower than what's in the United States. I don't think you can buy this in Australia.
The energy version has been banned.
The energy version. The hydration versions appear to be pretty innocuous. It's just good branding, but otherwise pretty innocuous. This is double the legal limit of caffeine per 100 milliliters. 100 milliliters is about half to a third of the size of a can of Coke because not everyone will use milliliters. I guess the danger in this is how popular it is among kids. Right? Kids are doing crazy things to get these drinks, and it tastes like medicine. It tastes like cough syrup or something.
Dr. Pepper had a real heyday here in the mid-1990s. Did you ever drink Dr. Pepper?
I did. I was okay with it because
I hated it. I thought it was terrible.
You hated it? Well, as kids, we took what we could get.
Very much a love affair with all things American product, during the mid-90s when I was growing up at least. And
the Pepsi versus Coke debate.
Is it a debate anymore?
It's not a debate anymore, but Pepsi is still around. But it's
Still love you Coke Zero, you non-erythritol-based drink.
Oh, yeah, it's aspartame. Right, aspartame. They came out and very clearly said, no, we're not erythritol Coca-Cola.
Still in my Coke Zero, yeah.
We drank off-brand cola a lot. Like, we just took what we could get as kids. Was it A brand?
Like a Kmart.
Yeah, Kmart in Australia.
Cola. I want to say it was like an Australia brand cola.
It could have been. It was off-brand cola, which we'll just take what we can get. What is popular with kids these days, I find it impossible to predict.
I can't predict.
Like the trends. So this is unbelievably popular. And for a can of drink, you would probably think it's in a can. I can buy it in bulk. Hopefully I'm not spending more than $2 to $3 per can on the resale market. Like, it's not just like PlayStations and sneakers. It's like cans of drink. Who wants to buy a used can of drink? People are paying like $20, $30, $40 for a can of drink.
I'm in the wrong field. We've got to up our versatility and our employability. Start selling Prime Energy drink.
We're going to leapfrog the box that they're putting us in. And I think that is why it has become banned in Australia, is that it's become so popular with kids, even if they can't buy the super caffeinated version of it in stores.
Yeah.
You could buy it online.
And it's not going to help, is it? Unfortunately, banning it is not going to help. It's probably just going to make it more popular. I think already has. So...
And many kids won't have heard of it until they see their parents listening to the headline on the drive home on radio, Prime Energy drinks banned. Oh, it must be cool. It's banned. It's like rock and roll. What's going on? I'm going to go find out more about it. Like, it's very edgy. Yes, this is our version of rock and roll.
Touch right now.
But I don't think kids listen to rock and roll these days. So it's their version. Like, rock and roll would be very, very corny. They'll listen to hardcore rap or hip hop.
I don't think they say rock and roll, no.
That brings me to the question, how much caffeine is too much caffeine? And is this really that bad?
Sometimes I test this limit every day.
Test this limit every day. So I guess no one really likes the idea of kids drinking that much coffee. But it's not illegal. Right? It's bad parenting, sure. But it's not technically legal for them to drink a ton of coffee. It's just if all their friends are doing it.
Right.
And
it's just about how much it contains per mil, right?
And young people are just knuckleheads. They might like really go hard. They might have like 4 or 5 of these sugary drinks in a row.
You don't know, do you? Yes, drink $80 worth.
In Australia, we call them alco pops, right? So the alcoholic drinks that are very sugary as well.
Yep,
and there was like a tax on it because we want to discourage people thinking alcohol is like sugary drinks. You can just keep going. So I guess it's a similar patronizing big brother mindset that we can't trust these young people to do their own things. So we're going to impose these extra rules.
Chew a few coffee beans.
As you're doing that, it's having the counter effect of spurring them on to think, oh, it's prohibited. It's exciting. It must be good for a reason. And that shows the power of YouTube and these YouTubers as that marketing brand behind it, which again reinforces the idea that we are making the wrong kind of videos, not getting free sunscreen, we're not getting energy drink endorsements.
No, I know. Coke Zero still hasn't sent me anything.
No, and we're not getting sponsored by any of the big drug companies to talk about their products.
That Society of Australia, if it exists, is certainly
we're not going to
with us.
We're not going to get hired as a PR company for either bats or the jabby jab vaccine. So we're in the wrong business on every front.
Wrong business.
If we weren't in this overarching regulated environment of all the drinks that you want, caffeinated or otherwise, what is caffeine actually doing to us, right? We all drink caffeine every day. We drink coffee every day. Certainly kids, when they're young, maybe shouldn't drink as much. Probably for the parents' sanity more than anything else.
Can you imagine?
Coffee.
On caffeine.
What is coffee doing to us at the molecular level? And there is some interesting parallels to the other drugs we talked about in this episode. It comes down to fundamentally receptors in our cells receiving signals. And if that signal is blocked, then some function is slowed down, changed, or delayed. And so what is the receptor that caffeine targets?
Adenosine receptor. So eventually adenosine binds to its receptor, parts of cells that receive signals, as we discussed, which tells the cell to slow down, making us feel drowsy and sleepy. So adenosine is having this effect on the receptor. It's why you feel tired after a big day of activity. While we're sleeping, energy use drops. It lowers adenosine levels as it gets shuffled back into other forms. You wake up in the morning feeling refreshed. If you get enough sleep. Caffeine's working by binding to the adenosine receptor and stopping adenosine having that effect on its receptor.
You'd be amazed by how much of our biological function is dictated by receptors.
Yes.
And not just what happens to receptors while they're still on the outside of the cell. There are whole people who dedicate decades of their lives to finding out where that receptor goes into the cell once it receives the signal.
What the signaling is, what it binds to.
There are these images and diagrams that have been endorsed by these scientific societies to say this is what happens when this receptor is activated. And those diagrams are drawn, I think, entirely as an FU. I think they draw it just to say, you
They
imbecile.
are huge diagrams. Yeah.
You imbeciles. Do you not know the complexity of life itself?
And it'll be
Because
called a simplified schematic. It'll have little arrows everywhere.
really to showcase how complex life is, because these receptors, they cross-react. Activating one receptor can have indirect effects on other receptors. Once the receptors go inside the cell, they could get recycled straight back up, or they could get degraded, or they could get rerouted via postal service inside the cell to different compartments. That sorting works incorrectly. If your UPS or FedEx cell driver gets lost, your whole cell could just kill itself. You know, like it's that serious.
Yeah, that's
so much
right.
of biology boils down to this. I'm saying that as a biased molecular biologist. We think
it's
it comes down
more complicated than you would ever think.
the thesis of this article is that coffee is just borrowing some energy. It's not creating new energy from scratch. If you keep drinking coffee, you will feel alert for an amount of time. After a while, it will catch up.
Yeah,
Any of you
that effect will stop.
on caffeine binges will relate and empathize with that sentiment.
I try and have some versatility in my caffeine intake.
Different versions of
You know, I start with a cup of tea in the morning and feel very refined, and then I get to work. Like, time for a coffee.
Time for coffee.
My boss might come for a walk with me. We'll get a coffee.
Get coffee, that's very
I'll
nice.
look at her and I'll just go, coffee.
Time for a coffee.
And she goes, yes, coffee.
And then by 2 p.m., you're rubbing it into your gums. You're rubbing
quite.
ground up coffee beans into your gums.
No, by 2 p.m. it's normally the Coke Zero.
Are the Coke Zero?
Yeah. And then at nighttime, I want all the caffeine removed from my drink through questionable chemical processes. And who
Chemical
knows
processes.
what kinds of things by drinking decaf.
There's a siren going on in the background. I think
There
someone
is.
is objecting
Someone's
to your
coming for
questionable
me.
caffeine practices. The prime energy vendors are coming after us after
And
bad
all those
mouthing.
microbats that are hiding in your jacket collection.
It's all the bats and the vaccines and the lobbyists for the big pharma that's coming for us. Final question we'll try and answer today is the idea of, yes, if you keep drinking caffeine, you're borrowing energy from your future self. And at one point in time, you will feel that lack of energy. And how that's explainable at the molecular level is very neat, because what's happening is that if it blocks the adenosine from binding to the receptor, that is not a irreversible block. And it shouldn't be. If it was, that'd be really scary, right?
It would be
Imagine
terrifying.
just block a receptor from working forever. So all the adenosine is still lying around, right? It's building up. And what often happens is that if something binds to the receptor, it gets degraded, or that signal is tamped down after it's bound. But if it can't actually bind, it doesn't just disappear, it's just hanging around. And so you will have the caffeine wear off after a while, hopefully. Rub your coffee beans into your gums into the early hours of the morning.
I'm feeling a bit worried now.
If you keep chasing the proverbial
Time
dragon,
for my next caffeine hit.
that adenosine will just keep building up, and then it will overwhelm, like in any competitive system, it will overwhelm the antagonists that are trying to there to block the receptor, and then it will just keep hitting the receptor again and again.
I feel impossibly tired.
Impossibly tired. That could be a stupor you don't wake up from. Been studied for exams, or if you've just coming off really, really long shifts from work, it takes a while to recover from that, right? It's not just overnight.
I remember in my uni exam, they were giving out free Red Bulls, like Red Bull promotional fans. I don't know if that's still happening.
But
But
they're not going to give out prime energy drinks.
No, they won't. But
Although I guess they can't ban it if you're an adult,
so
right?
during exam period, they were giving out freebies. I never drank it. I never took it because I was worried I'd need to use the bathroom in the middle of the exam.
I'm not at all very adventurous in this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
but I think I had some energy drinks that my dad had. My dad's much more adventurous in this kind of stuff. He'd drink and eat any kind of thing. So I would have some of this energy drink before I went to play basketball.
Right,
I
okay,
played basketball back in the day. And then I was playing the game. I was like, man, why am I feeling so tired so easily? And I think it really accelerates all the processes. And I think first 5 minutes of the session, I was feeling great. But then I was like, man, I feel really tired and my heart's beating really fast. So I think it has all these unintended consequences if you're very young and not really sure of how to regulate your intake of certain
When
things.
your body's still developing, not a good idea.
Not a good idea. So I guess if there's one takeaway from data is that much of biological functionality comes down to receptors
Yes.
at the cell level. And again, I'll bring that diagram up on screen to show you just how complex it really is. This is not an invitation for you to read the primary literature on all the different signaling factors and receptors, but much of the headlines around new drugs can be passed through that lens. How is it interacting with our cells?
That's right.
And the more information you're equipped with as a citizen, if not a scientifically literate citizen, then that's a good framework to understand any of the new things that are being advertised.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Something like the prime energy drink, when you break it down, it's kind of just caffeine. And we're all kind of hopefully have some comments about how much coffee we should have.
Maybe
Energy
you do.
drinks.
I clearly don't.
Maybe you don't. You're not rubbing caffeine into your gums like Amanda is. The main remit of this podcast is for everyone to demystify how complex science might really be and what are the casual entrance points of knowledge to grapple with seemingly very complex ideas in science. I'll be honest, now I'm curious about this Prime drink. I don't think I want to fork out $20 a can, but
I
like,
bet it's sea sweet and tastes disgusting.
well, for our listeners, I will try and track down a can of Prime Hydration.
Do you want to drink it on the next podcast?
Okay,
We might get a heap more views just by the hydration version.
Well, we can't even get the other
I don't
version.
have any bucks to spare right now.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of the Crossover Connections with Jack Wayne. You can watch the full episodes on YouTube as well as via any podcast player of your choice, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher. Thanks for listening, watching along. My name is Jack.
And I'm Amanda.
And hope to connect with you again in the next episode.